Hello, Dog Nation. My name is Brandon Adams. I hope you all had a great weekend. Welcome into being a part today of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, and we have a lot to talk about. By now, you know that Brenton Cox is at Florida. We'll address that near the end of today's program. You're also aware of at least some of the proceedings of the scrimmage that took place inside Sanford Stadium on Saturday. We'll hear from Kirby Smart, some of his thoughts on that. We'll react to that ourselves on the program today. And our buddy John Stinchcomb, the former Georgia great, he'll share his thoughts on kind of where a team is supposed to be at this point as we head towards the start of the season, August 31st against Vanderbilt. Kirby apparently not too happy with what he saw on Saturday, but is that par for the course for a coach this time of year? John Stinchcomb will tell us all about that. And yes, indeed, we will react a lot to the big catch seen around the world from George Pickens, the video that leaked out and the reaction to that, as you might imagine. I enjoyed myself quite a bit when I got a chance to see that video, and we'll talk about it next as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So, did you see anything good on the internet this weekend? Obviously, by now, my assumption is that, yes, most of you, if not all of you, have seen the little clip of Georgia wide receiver George Pickens. Is it Parrish Walton? Is that the name of the guy on Twitter who shared this? I don't know where he got the video from, but somehow, some way, a brief glimpse of the Georgia scrimmage closed to the public, with the exception of a few high-dollar donors, closed to the public. A little bit of a video clip sneaks out of that, and it is George Pickens, and y'all know I'm kind of a carnival barker by nature, so I want to be careful about overselling this. This is the greatest catch in the history of football. This is incredible. Now, listen, ESPN.com even wrote about this the other day, about how prevalent one-handed catches have gotten in football. If you watch a lot of the Georgia players on the field before a game, they essentially just warm up by catching the ball one-handed, almost like you and your dad playing catch in the backyard. So somehow, either because hands are getting bigger or the ball's getting easier to catch, somehow, some way, one-handed catches are kind of getting easier. But that doesn't do anything for me to change the excitement level of what we saw from Pickens. And y'all know, especially those of you who watch or listen every day, that I have definitely been rolling down the George Pickens hype train down the tracks here for quite some time. And if we could have rewound back to, like, say, March, when the season just seemed forever away, a decade away, even though it was really only a few months away, if I could have picked then someone to create buzz from Georgia's first scrimmage, I guess Pickens would probably be the guy I would have picked, simply because that's the dimension that I believe that Georgia has been missing. That wide receiver who makes everybody go, wow. I mean, I have no idea how many times this thing's been viewed on the internet by now, whether it be Instagram, where I believe it first appeared, Twitter, where it appeared when I saw it. There's no telling how many times it's been seen, but the fact that it's a Georgia wide receiver and a newcomer to the program at that, who's the one creating this buzz, I think that's really good news for Georgia, given the fact that we know wide receiver is a big issue with the guys that left to go to the NFL, with the fact that J.J. Holloman was dismissed from the team. That makes it cool, but we also know that if you compare Georgia to an Alabama or a Clemson, when you look at the Justin Rosses, when you look at the Jerry Judys, receivers like that just kind of seem to be something that Georgia has been missing. So to add a guy like Pickens, who at least on that brief video clip kind of looked the part, I just think that's really exciting for UGA fans. Now, as you might imagine, Kirby Smart was asked about this. There was even buzz on the internet, apparently, about the Pickens catch, even before the scrimmage was even done. People who were there going to their phones and saying, wow, y'all really missed it. Here's something really cool. My big donation to Georgia gave me a chance to see. And so Kirby Smart was asked, hey, heard some things about George Pickens. Heard some things about another guy fans are excited about, Samir White. Those are just simply not the kinds of questions Kirby Smart necessarily likes answering, but he did give us a pretty entertaining response to this. I think you'll like it.
There was a ton of things out there, so maybe we should read the message boards for everything, but I'm not here to verify what was said on the message boards. I mean, there were a lot of things done out there. I can't go through play-by-play all the things that were done. I think people were talking about Zamir because they haven't seen him in a while. George is out there catching the ball every day, but so was Dom, Tyler Simmons, D-Rob, Matt Landers, Cager. I mean, all those guys were.
I mean, listen, I am not going to pretend for 1 second that Kirby Smart, when he finally had a chance to see that video, I'm not going to pretend for 1 second he didn't do his own version of the famous popcorn gif with, going back to the Justin Fields thing from not all that long ago. I'm just simply not going to pretend that's the case. He obviously knows what that's all about. But as a head coach, he sort of has a little bit of a job to do to keep people from getting way too out in front on being too excited about this kind of stuff. It's fans' job to be excited. It's Kirby Smart's job to temper some of that excitement. And on Saturday, the Georgia football machine worked exactly the way that it's supposed to work. And by the way, speaking of some of those UGA fans who reached out to me, I was amazed by how many people were kind of conversing with this on social media. A couple brief glimpses of that. Yes, I have been obviously well known for my belief that Pickens is a pretty special player, and Ross Chadwick sent a message to me on Twitter with this video saying, if DawgNation Daily, that's me of course, wasn't on the Pickens hype train already, and yeah, Ross, you're 100% right about that. I definitely am on the hype train, and I do think this video, to at least some form or fashion, justifies the hype that we've contributed to around here when it comes to Pickens. Adding a 5-star receiver of Pickens' caliber is a really big deal. And with that in mind, I got another Twitter message that I thought was pretty poignant as well, because we know that in a lot of ways, Pickens' presence on this Georgia roster came to be because of the fact that Jaden Hazelwood, another receiver that we hyped up for a long time, decided he wanted to be elsewhere. But you can show that tweet again. But all dog on Twitter, it's at DogsBeGators, which if I must admit is a Twitter handle I kind of like. He says to Jeff Santella and me, sometimes everything happens for a reason. I take that to mean that Hazelwood going to Oklahoma may turn out for Georgia to be a very good thing if it indeed opened the door to George Pickens. And yeah, I don't think I could be more excited had Hazelwood joined the Georgia roster than I am right now about Pickens, not just based on that particular video, but also based on what I've seen with my own eyes when I've been able to be out at Georgia practice for a couple of minutes. And based on the overall buzz that seems to exist around him, he is a really exciting addition, I believe, to this Georgia offense. Now, around here, we also like to play the hits. We are very much a fan-driven show. Fans of Georgia, of the Georgia Bulldogs, listeners and viewers to DawgNation Daily have significant leeway to contribute to our program. We kind of play the hits. We play requests. I got another tweet that I thought was kind of funny. Let me show you this one. It comes from John Anthony, who says, I bet DawgNation Daily did that ho, ho, ho when he watched this play. That's going back to a reference to something that I...
Oh, wow. Are you kidding me?
So that's a reference to something that had happened for me on Before the Hedges, and so around here we try to do that kind of thing. So yeah, so if you're watching on video, you get to see that. My voice doing the ho 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 laugh going back to Before the Hedges presented by Kroger, timed right there with the George Pickens video. So it's kind of a nice thing to be able to see. So yeah, listen, I mean, overall, I just think that it's a really cool thing to have that video out there, and it creates the kind of conversation that ought to exist around Georgia as we head towards the start of the season. I would never go so far as to tell you that the presence of that catch, that highlight, as much fun as it was to see, means that George Pickens is going to be an All-American. He's going to be the next A.J. Green or anything like that. That would be taking things too far. But if I wasn't already excited about his debut coming up on August 31st, I'm even more excited about it now. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you, and thank you for being with us live on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. We're on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and we are available as a podcast wherever you find them. We love our podcast audience, and we appreciate you listening to our show, whether you check in on the Apple devices or the Android devices using the Google Podcast Player. I like to post the show at the world-famous DawgNation.com. Many of you, even though that's kind of our oldest platform, you still go right there to DawgNation.com and listen to the show every day, and we really, really appreciate that. It's great to have you with us here today on DawgNation Daily. We're going to get our buddy John Stinchcomb in a moment. John's a grizzled veteran of the football world, having played in the NFL and seeing all kinds of highlight catches and having lived through his time at Georgia. We'll get his thoughts on the Pickens catch here coming up as well. But there's also something else I want to get into with John. And after kind of a fun, happy topic to start the show, this may be admittedly a little less so. I talked about the buzz generated by Pickens, and you can say, based on the response there from Kirby Smart, that there may have been a little buzz out there involving Zamir White too. And some of these other younger players in the program have just kind of had us talking now for quite some time. Did you hear about what Nolan Smith did in practice? Did you hear about the big hit Lewis Seen laid on somebody? How about Nakobe Dean and what he might be able to do? A lot of these young guys right now are really bringing a level of energy to the Georgia program. However, unfortunately, maybe, on Saturday, you didn't get quite as much, I'm going to use that same word again, energy from the Georgia starters, the veterans, the guys who've been around for a while, the guys that we presume to be the top leaders on this team. Apparently, they didn't bring it quite as hard as the younger guys did on this particular Saturday. In fact, here is a little bit about what Kirby Smart had to say about that.
Probably wasn't the kind of scrimmage I was expecting to have. I mean, it wasn't the temperament and the enthusiasm, but we've gone, I think, 6-7 practices now and gotten after it pretty good, and we got after it pretty good on Friday, but I didn't think we had the same juice today as a team, and both ones units were a little lethargic, not real good timing, some busts on defense, some things to clean up. Good news is we got time to clean it up.
So lethargic is obviously a word right there that I don't like, but Kirby Smart also references at the end that, the good news is we've got time to clean this up. The good news is we'll get this fixed and solved by the time August 31st rolls around. And I'm kind of two minds on this. On the one hand, I'm ready for the conversation around Georgia football to be about the guys who are going to be most responsible for leading UGA to a national championship. Because for as much fun as George Pickens is, and as much as I think he could be a little extra spice into the formula for the Dogs this season, if Georgia wins the national championship, it's not going to be because of a freshman. A freshman may help get you there, and you may not be able to do it without him necessarily, but the nucleus of this story and the engine that drives all this are the Jake Fromms and the Andrew Thomases and the DeAndre Swifts, and pick a name on defense from a guy who's been here, Richard LeCount, a guys who've been here for a while. Ultimately, those are the guys that are going to determine whether or not Georgia wins the national championship this season. As I said before, I'm kind of a carnival barker by nature, and in a lot of ways, DawgNation Daily exists to reflect the buzz that's out there among Georgia fans. As I said before, it's kind of a rumor mill thing, a game of telephone. Did you hear about blah, blah, blah? Well, it seems like for the last couple of weeks during summer practice, and certainly a lot during spring practice, the did you hear blah, blah, blah talk has been about someone who's young and feeling a sense of urgency to fight for a spot on this roster. And when you have the guys who are more cemented as starters, to use Kirby Smart's own word there, lethargic, there's a part of me that wants to say, hey, it's time for the faces on the front of the media guide to step up and play the best during practice. But there's also another part of this, which is, we've all been around the block a million times before. We know that this is, for the most part, par for the course for the month of August, not just for Georgia, but pretty much any team that has high expectations for an upcoming season, that the first scrimmage is supposed to be the worst, and then the second one's supposed to be a little better than that, and the third one's supposed to be, all right, guys, now we're ready to go out and start this season. Let's go out there and show America what we're all about. That's the natural stair steps of progression that go on here. So I'm tempted not to want to make too much of Kirby Smart describing his starters as being lethargic, because I think pretty much every coach says his starters are lethargic some way about halfway through the month of August. But nonetheless, I am ready for veterans to be the ones creating the buzz coming off of practice, and not so much the newcomers, although to hear from Kirby Smart again, it sounds like it was some of those younger guys, some of those hungry guys who were really taking it to him on Saturday. Here's Kirby again.
I thought the second offense and the second defense had some positive things done, but we got to clean up those first units, and we got to make sure that everybody's kind of responding the right way and creating identity. I didn't think that we created an identity today. Some guys did some individual things well.
So listen, I mean, as a media member, when you go out and see a little bit of practice, you see I think it was 8 minutes on Saturday, and it's 10 minutes here and there. You don't get to see a lot. But what you do get to see, though, is there are players everywhere. I mean, everybody looks like they can play. Everybody's tall. Everybody's big. Everybody runs fast. And so the twos occasionally getting the bests of ones when the twos have the credentials that the Georgia guys have, that makes a little bit of sense. But for Georgia to win a national championship, those ones, those famous names, the names that the kids all know, they've got to be the ones dominating at Georgia practices this month. So for Fromm and Swift and LeCount and the rest of those veterans, they've got a couple of weeks to get that done, and my guess is they will do just that. All right, before I bring on John Stinchcomb here on DawgNation Daily, let me tell you about a really cool event coming up with our friends at the Atlanta Braves. They've got UGA Day coming up on Monday, September 2nd, a really cool Labor Day event there for their UGA Day at SunTrust Park. The Braves are going to take on the Blue Jays there that day. Champ Bailey, who just went into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, the great former Dog, is going to throw out the first pitch. Mohamed Massaquoi is going to lead the chop to start the game. Now, when you get one of these ticket packages for UGA fans, listen to what it comes with. An exclusive co-branded Braves UGA hat. I've actually tweeted one of these out before because I love the way you've got the Braves A on the front and the Georgia G kind of on the side. This is one of the coolest things I've seen from the Braves, and you get one with a part of your ticket package. Also, there's a donation that's going to be made to UGA alumni scholarships. First pitch there on Labor Day is 1:20. It's a fun weekend, long weekend. You'll have just watched the the Dogs against Vanderbilt that previous Saturday. So be at SunTrust Park on Monday for the 1:20 start against the Toronto Blue Jays. Let me give you the website to go to. Go to braves.com/UGA. That's braves.com/UGA and be a part of UGA Day coming up Monday, September 2nd at SunTrust Park as the Braves take on the Blue Jays. Atlanta Braves baseball, chop on. We'll hear more from Kirby Smart later on. Reaction to the Brenton Cox news. For now, though, let's talk to our buddy John Stinchcomb. And I will always say I enjoy having John Stinchcomb as a part of our program, but on days like this, it's probably even more fun to get a chance to talk to the former Dog because he has been in these moments, hot summer scrimmages. Saturday was very hot in Athens. Georgia practices again today. If I heard the weatherman correctly, I want to say it's 97 today, which is just brutal. John, what's it like this time of year, and how much do you have to fight through that heat to either hold on to your starting spot or beat out a veteran? How much does the heat play into all of that?
Oh, buddy, it's like wrestling a silverback. You just know that X factor is going to be a problem today. I mean, it's hot. I mean, heck, you practice all year long in it, but days like this are special, especially at this point in training camp where you're a little bit tired, you've had a scrimmage, and you know it's going to be a grinder. And, about this point in training camp, there's usually a day where there's a drop-off. You can feel it. You're trying to push through it, and then coaches start climbing your tree quicker than ever because they know it's coming. And it happens at about this time in training camp, a couple weeks in. You've knocked around a little bit. You're sore. It's hot, and you still have to find a way to press. So it's days like this where you don't miss one thing about football.
Plenty of days when you probably do. There's obviously a lot of pageantry and glory associated with it, but hot days like this, yeah, I'm guessing being a spectator is not quite such a bad thing. And along those lines, John, I said this before you joined us, that sometimes we're left to decipher what Kirby Smart means by something, and you said about this time in every summer there's that moment where you feel like you hit a wall. Most of the players do, and maybe for Georgia that was Saturday. After being out in the heat on Friday, Kirby said they didn't respond to it well on Saturday, and in audio that I played before you joined us on the show, Kirby said the starters were lethargic. And admittedly, John, I don't know if this is a rant he had planned on Thursday or if this really is a reaction to something that he had seen on that Saturday. As someone who knows Kirby and kind of knows the football world, is this the kind of thing where all coaches just sort of have planned to say we're nowhere close to being ready for the start of the season? Or is there a chance we should take Kirby at his word on this?
You don't think coaches use psychological warfare against their players, do you? Absolutely. I mean, you've been grinding and you know it, and as a coach, you're trying to push them. You're trying to get them to that point where mental toughness is a factor. And to use the media to say, my guys are lethargic and aren't pushing, you don't think that's a motivating factor for the next day? Or the times where a coach says, golly, our starters aren't looking so great, that's not a little fire in their belly for the next practice or for that backup player who's competing and wants the spot? Absolutely. It's a motivator, and guys pay attention. I mean, they see the articles, they feel the temperature in the room of what's being said, and it's part of it. It's part of training camp where I think at this time of year, you could read the media, what's released for each team at any level. And about this time, a couple weeks in, you're going to start seeing those comments from the coaches to get guys to stay engaged, because it's a war, man. It's a grind, and you get to that point where mentally you're going, you got to find that way to push through. And coaches are trying to help you. Help you is what they're doing. Yeah.
As Dan Lanning said, they're doing a lot of encouraging out there, and he used some, almost, mental air quotes with that, because you and I both know that some of this probably encouraging may be a kind way to say it, but that's exactly what you would hope for and expect for a team that has the aspirations that Georgia has. And kind of along those lines, John, another thing that I said before you joined us, if I'm a freshman right now, I've got a built-in sense of urgency because it's going to be really hard for me to play, and therefore I'm fighting for every rep, every snap, because otherwise I may get left on the outside looking in. Only 70 guys, after all, get to travel to Vanderbilt because of SEC rules. There's some good players who are going to be watching this game on TV, not allowed to travel to the game. And if you're a veteran player, if you're Andrew Thomas along that offensive line, a position group that obviously you know very well, a LeCount, a Fromm, a DeAndre Swift, one of these juniors, or in some cases seniors who've been around for a while, you have to reach down and find your own version of that urgency. And that's probably where that Do More campaign for Georgia kind of comes from here a bit, because they don't maybe have the same built-in sense of urgency. They've been starters before, but if Georgia's going to win it all, if they're going to win a championship, it's obviously the veteran players, the more famous names in this program, the guys who've been here for a while, who are probably going to do the most to push that on, and that's one of the things that I think makes this time of year very interesting.
You hit it, man. For veterans, it's a little bit different than some of your rookies, because for a veteran, you're talking about, I want to take my game to another level. I know what my challenges are. I've been in the fire. I've seen the flames, and I'm trying to push through to make my game better than what it was. And for a incoming freshman, what they're saying is, I've got the skills. I've won a couple of battles, I'm guessing, up to this point, but they're going, holy moly, this thing doesn't stop. I mean, it is a never-ending grind where one or two plays isn't enough. That's not going to get you on the travel team. That's not going to get you on the field, and that's not going to get you a starting spot. It's the consistency and ability for that flash that you showed that got you those 5 stars, that got every coach in America to tell you you're going to revolutionize their program, that it can only happen if you're consistently making those plays.
Sure.
So for the freshman that flashed and said, this is what I can do, I can beat the SEC's best because I can beat our guys, once is not enough. And when you grind through training camp, you realize that these opportunities keep coming, and they keep coming, and you've got to maximize on each one of them and prove that you can consistently beat the guy across from you.
Along those lines, and I'm sure you've had a chance to see this by now, George Pickens on Saturday, in a video that got leaked out, made one of the cooler one-handed catches you're going to see. And I specifically wanted to ask you about this because you are probably among the lesser emotional people when it comes to the game of football. You played at a really high level at Georgia. You saw what it took to win an SEC championship. Had there been a playoff in 2002, your team would have been in it. You go on to play in the NFL there as well, and you saw some amazing athletes at your time playing on Sundays as well. So you've kind of been there, done that. You've seen that. And yet I'm guessing when a guy like Pickens goes up, makes a one-handed catch, kind of draped over a defensive back, hauls it down, finds a way to stay in bounds, I think even you probably understand where the excitement from the average fan comes from on that. I'm not going to try to tell people that means that George Pickens is the next Randy Moss. That'd be obviously taking it too far. But it takes a pretty special athlete to kind of go out and do what Pickens did on Saturday. I'm guessing you'll probably agree with me on that.
Absolutely, and that's kind of speaking to the point that I was making just prior, that these guys, they're 5 stars for a reason. You know, George Pickens can make unbelievable plays, and that's what we've been told, and now we've seen it. Now, for him, it's or for a fan, they're going, well, why isn't he starting yet? Well, it might be because he's not blocking, blocking on those plays that they don't make the highlight reel, or he's running the wrong route, or he's, one step further than he should be before he makes his break. Those are the kind of things that come with consistency that you see from veterans. But with a guy like Pickens, man, that's why he was brought here, because he is a playmaking Jesse, buddy. He can go up there and get the ball and get us all fired up, and we just need to see it. We need to see it with consistency because, man, he's got the skills. He's got the talent to make those kind of plays that not everybody can. I mean, he is a special talent, and you get to see that from one play. I'm just excited to see, can he consistently be the guy? I mean, the more he's able to block in the run game, I mean, that's kind of where Georgia football starts offensively.
Yeah.
If he can make those blocks from his spot, well, now he gets to stay on the field more and can have the opportunities to make those kind of plays. And if he can't, then it's you bring him in situationally, and the DBs and the coordinators that are across from him kind of know what you're up against and what you're about to face from the offense.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. Let me do 2 quick things before I let you go today, John. And this one is a very practical question on what is unfortunately not a super positive subject for UGA, but Brenton Cox, former 5-star signee, defensive end outside linebacker, has left the Georgia program. Kirby Smart said Cox left of his own accord and has enrolled at Florida. That news came out on Friday. And, John, the most common question I've gotten is, does Brenton Cox know enough to hurt UGA? Does he take the so-called game plan with him to Gainesville? As a former player yourself, albeit a different position, but you battled guys like Brenton Cox throughout your career, does Cox know enough to hurt Georgia? Does he have secrets that he can tell Dan Mullen?
It sounds more like, I mean, this new transfer portal system, it's much more like free agency in the NFL, where you're about to play the Browns, and all of a sudden you've picked up their defensive end they released a week or so ago. Here's what fans need to know, that every school across the country knows what your playbook is. It's not a matter of what plays you like to run. It's how you run them and how you can stop them. I think the knowledge that a Brenton Cox or any kind of transfer brings is about personnel. And, what are some of the weaknesses? What do you try to do? What were the challenges? What are the limitations of the various players, the guys you played next to on defense, and the guys you faced every day in practice? If I'm a Brenton Cox, I'd say, here's what I like to do. Here's where Andrew Thomas had some difficulties. Here's what Isaiah Wilson didn't want to see. Here's what Ben Cleveland and Cade Mays, this is where they would struggle sometimes. Or they can bring to the table, he can say, with Monty, we were always working on him with, the play-action pass with a fullback leading through the A-gap. He would stay stuck in there an extra second. Those little things about specific players and personnel. It's not about the playbook. Everybody knows the general plays you like to run week to week. It's just a matter of when you choose to run them. It's more about the personnel and getting that inside scoop of the players that you're going to face that a transfer like Brenton can bring to the table.
Well, John, that's an outstanding analysis. We really appreciate your time on DawgNation Daily, sharing it all with us. It's one of the reasons why I love having you on our program and why I've enjoyed doing our Own the East series with you, courtesy of our friends at Georgia's Own Credit Union. You've got a great insight when it comes to the game of football, and we always enjoy our chats. I look forward to seeing you here again on DawgNation Daily very soon.
Always, B.A. It's a good time. Thanks, sir.
Great stuff there from John Stinchcomb, the former Dog. And as I said before, there's a certain kind of insight that you can only get from someone who played the game. And, you know, I obviously can make assumptions about what Cox does or does not know upon leaving Georgia from Florida. My assumption was that, as I joked about on Friday, that I didn't believe that Brenton Cox had the nuclear secrets, that he wasn't taking the nuclear launch codes with him to Gainesville, Florida. And to hear John Stinchcomb say, yeah, when it comes to the actual schematics of offense and defense, everybody already knows those anyway. And honestly, no player can tell a coach probably what he doesn't already know on that. But to hear John, as a former player, kind of put that into words and explain it that way, I think there's a lot of value in that. I think that's a really cool thing. And you probably also heard me say with John there a moment ago about our Own the East video series, courtesy of Georgia's Own Credit Union. I've been writing a piece to go along with each of these videos. Yesterday, I did one on the Georgia offensive line. I've looked at Zamir White already. I've looked at the Heisman candidacy of Jake Fromm and DeAndre Swift. I looked at, speaking of Cox, what his departure might mean for the reputation of the 2018 class and why there are still a lot of guys from that class, former number one ranked class back in 2018, who have a chance to make a big name for themselves at Georgia. I would invite you to go to DawgNation.com if you haven't already, read the pieces or watch the videos or do both. I'd love for you to do that. It's really our way of doing the season preview around here, and for me, there's a special meaning and a special emphasis to it because I've said before, I believe that Georgia's going to go 12-0 this season. I believe that Georgia enters the college football playoff as an undefeated team. In terms of winning the national championship, in terms of whatever happens beyond that, because of the fact this is DawgNation Daily and because of the fact I've got the red and black clothes on every day, many people might assume the red and black colored glasses to go along with that. If here on this show, if we're going to pick Georgia to win the national championship, I believe we have to have to use a bigger word than I should use, a preponderance of evidence to support that. We've got to really put our money where our mouth is. We've got to be able to back that up. And so the Own the East series for me is kind of our way of doing that, or my personal way of doing that. Here are the things that make this Georgia team maybe different from the Georgia teams you've seen in the past, and maybe special even in comparison to teams like Alabama and Clemson of the true national elite. So if you haven't seen our season preview series yet at DawgNation.com, Own the East, presented by Georgia's Own Credit Union, my hope is you'll check it out.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Fun stuff from John Stinchcomb as always. And on the subject of Brenton Cox, we'll actually hear from Kirby Smart on Brenton a little bit more coming up in a moment. He didn't say much, but what he did say packed a wallop, at least in one regard. We'll get to that coming up in just a little bit. Before that, though, of course, let's do our SEC Through. And as we transition to the rest of the SEC for a moment, let me tell you about my friends at Kroger. You know, back-to-school deals have landed at Kroger right now. And for most everybody in the metro area, I don't think there's anybody left in our area that hasn't started schools yet, statewide or wherever you might be listening. Maybe you haven't started yet, but for the most part, you're back in school now. So maybe you've gotten the pencils and the paper and stuff like that, but it's snacks every day. It's the lunches every day. I got the picky eaters. There's a lot of stuff in the cafeteria they don't like to eat, so that means they're brown bagging it, or my kids, they wouldn't be caught dead carrying a brown bag into school. They got to have the fancy lunchbox of some kind. But inside that lunchbox is food that we got at Kroger because Kroger takes care of our wallets. Listen, it's expensive raising two young kids, especially this time of year with them doing a bunch of stuff at the start of the school year. So make it easier on yourself, whether it be your back-to-school supplies, the stuff that you eat for snacks, the stuff that they take for lunch, or just the stuff that you provide for them when they get back home. Kroger's the place to go for all of that. Check that out today. All right, there was some, and I'm not going to be snarky about this. I'm going to be honest. There was a little bit of sad news coming out of the SEC. Maybe sad's too strong of a word, but disappointing news if you're an Alabama fan. I saw where Trey Sanders, the former five-star running back, former UGA recruiting target, I saw where he was dismissed from the program. Not dismissed. I'm sorry. I'm conflating two stories. Let me start all over again. let me be very careful here. Trey Sanders was not dismissed from Alabama. I was thinking ahead to another story. Trey Sanders suffered an injury is the point I'm trying to get to. I've never set up a story worse than this. Sanders hurt his foot. Now, he's out indefinitely with this. Could be all season long. We'll have to find out on that. But Sanders, who had a lot of hype coming into Alabama, he himself had even talked about the possibility that he might win the Heisman Trophy in his first year in Alabama. A guy that also, was a player that Georgia turned to on the heels of not getting John Emery Jr. So this is obviously a disappointing loss for Alabama, but it goes to show you something else as well. It goes to show you the overall depth that Alabama has in place, because they are able to absorb a Trey Sanders loss in a way that a lot of other programs are not able to do. For most programs, if Trey Sanders got hurt to start practice, that's all anybody would talk about around that program for a week. But in Alabama, you've obviously still got Najee Harris. You've obviously still got Brian Robinson, although Robinson as a prospect probably a little less substantial than Sanders is. This is still an Alabama program that this year that's going to be able to run the football. So Sanders being gone is the kind of thing that Alabama's more easily able to absorb, which is kind of the blueprint that Georgia's building itself around as well. That Georgia goes out and recruits the kind of talent where almost no single injury. Now, this year it wouldn't be great to see a Jake Fromm get hurt, obviously, and there'd be huge disappointment if a guy like DeAndre Swift or Andrew Thomas were to get hurt. But Georgia has built its program much like Alabama in that any individual injury, for the most part, can be absorbed. The gambling people will tell you that, frankly, individual players aren't worth as much of the point spread as you might think anyway. But if you have a deep enough roster, individual injuries can be absorbed. Bama can absorb the Trey Sanders loss. Georgia, for the most part, can absorb any individual loss it might face this year as well, and that's kind of an interesting recruiting war that continues to go on with these two programs. Speaking of wars involving Alabama, this one more of a war of words, and this one is, I think, kind of weird, although incredibly interesting. So in the Big Ten now, you have Josh Gaddis, the former Bama wide receivers coach. He is now offensive coordinator at Michigan. Former Alabama offensive coordinator Mike Locksley is now the head coach at Maryland. And I guess Locksley, going back to Big Ten media days, I didn't see this when it first came out, but apparently this is the genesis of all of this, said something about Gaddis not having experience as a play caller. And Gaddis comes back in response and talks about how he had a lot of influence on the overall offensive strategy if it wasn't the play calling itself. And then Locksley, who I'm really surprised, came back and took the took the bait on this one more time, was quoted by some media around the Maryland program as saying, because Gaddis had referenced himself having all kinds of binders or notepads with all kinds of stuff, and Locksley said that those were suggestions, essentially inferring that he was the guy that was ultimately faced with making the overall big choice on that. So it's kind of interesting to see two guys that worked together at Alabama last year now having a fight about how much control they each had over the Alabama offense, and Locksley's contention this was solely his offense, and I guess Gaddis trying to make himself sound more experienced than maybe some of his critics would say that he is. It's kind of interesting to see these two former Tide guys going back and forth with each other, and also is at least some way reminiscent of Georgia's situation where Jim Chaney was the play caller last year, although Kirby Smart would say that James Coley had some influence over that. Thus far, Coley and Chaney haven't had too much of a squabble about their various roles. The two Alabama guys apparently have. I think that's kind of interesting, and for now, we'll make that your SEC through. Let me talk for a moment here as well to kind of piggyback more off of what John Stinchcomb was saying about Brenton Cox. That John says, no big deal that Cox goes to Florida. There aren't that many kind of secrets that he can reveal. The playbooks are already pretty obvious and apparent to the coaches. As John said, you might be able to say something about some individual tendencies of players. He prefers to do this. He has a problem when you do that. But ultimately, I would add to what John said on that, that's still about talent and winning a one-on-one matchup. There's not necessarily some great secret that goes along with that. You're either going to be able to beat that guy in a one-on-one situation or you are not. I thought John's answer on this a moment ago, here's a part of DawgNation Daily today, was really interesting. I also thought it was interesting to hear Kirby Smart talk about Brenton Cox there as well. Asked, hey, are you worried about him going to Florida? Kirby had a very carefully worded answer, a very short answer, but there was one pretty important aspect of the answer, which I'm sure you can figure out for yourself. Here is Kirby on the subject of Brenton Cox now at Florida.
Concerns, I don't know about that. Brenton chose to withdraw from the University of Georgia, go into the portal. He's now at another SEC institution, so we wish him nothing but the best, and we appreciate his contributions while he was here.
So obviously that's a pretty, as I said, sort of legalese type answer from Kirby Smart. I thought there was a chance that he might be a little more forthcoming about that. In fact, when we did our live version of DN90 on Friday on the DawgNation video channels when the Brenton Cox news first came out, I even openly speculated about this, that I really feel like that Florida putting Brenton on the roster as quickly as it did and in the manner that it did was a little bit of a PR shot across the bow at Georgia. And I didn't know if Kirby Smart might respond in kind with establishing some PR credentials for why Cox is no longer on the team. Ultimately, though, Kirby chose a different tack than that, and I think there's a specific reason that he did. He says that Brenton, quote-unquote, chose to leave Georgia and go to Florida. That obviously flies in the face of some of the reporting that was out there that Cox was dismissed from the program. Frankly, I don't know the sources of the original outlet, which was UJSports.com, that said that Brenton Cox was dismissed. Frankly, I don't have any reason to doubt their sourcing on this. I don't know their sourcing. I don't know the truth behind the actual story here, but I have no reason to doubt the Rivals report on this that Cox was dismissed from the program. I think some things sometimes are left to interpretation, and Kirby Smart is publicly choosing to interpret the Cox departure as that he chose to leave the Georgia program, because obviously, to go back to the legalistic part of all of this, or the legalese part of all of this, if Georgia kicked off Brenton Cox, that does add more fuel to the argument that Cox might try to make that being at Florida, he deserves the chance to be eligible right away to play for the Gators, because he could throw up his hands and say, I didn't have a home on the Georgia roster anymore. They threw me off the team. Therefore, I shouldn't have to sit out a year. I should be granted immediate eligibility at Florida. But by Kirby Smart saying, listen, Brenton was a player on our team. He chose to leave, and, whatever else kind of happens after that, all of a sudden that argument for Brenton Cox is a little bit more difficult to make. And by the way, Kirby's claim on this is also bolstered by the now deleted tweet from Cox's mom, where she also said that Cox was not kicked off the team. I don't know if a deleted tweet is usable as evidence in a proceeding like this or not, and frankly, I'm not quite sure that it matters. I'll be shocked if Brenton's able to play for Florida this year. I don't think that's why the Gators are doing this. I think they like the idea of Brenton in the future in 2020, even if it's just for 1 year, because obviously he brings a lot of talent to the table. And I think Florida likes, even if it's just for a brief moment, to upend what has been a major offseason of big-time recruiting wins for Georgia and the state of Florida, making the Dan Mullen program seemingly just look kind of small. Mullen has been greatly diminished thus far by the back and forth that has seemingly gone on between Georgia and Florida. This is his attempt, I believe, to slow some of that kind of stuff down, and it only remains to be seen how much it's going to work. So with that all in mind, we'll get ready to wrap up our program here today, and we'll do so the way we always do, with our Gator Hater Update. It's now been 1,017 days since Florida's beaten Georgia. And the byproduct of the Brenton Cox stuff is we do believe that the Florida rivalry is supposed to be Georgia's most important. And when we first started talking about this way back in 2016, you'd be hard-pressed to find many Georgia fans who, I shouldn't say many Georgia fans, the majority of Georgia fans maybe didn't feel that way. You would hear about Georgia Tech, especially after Tech beat Georgia after the 2016 season. You would hear about Auburn a lot because, let's face it, Auburn doesn't have any shortage of reasons to hate them from time to time, at least when it comes to Georgia fans. So the cool thing about some of the stuff that's happened lately is it does add some fuel to a rivalry that I think is important. I think the cocktail party this year is going to be a ton of fun. I'll see you back here tomorrow on DawgNation Daily. And on video. Good to have you all with us. Time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. Air, heating, plumbing, electric. Let me apologize one more time to Trey Sanders for saying that he got dismissed from Alabama. That's not what I even meant to say. I just somehow got those two things completely conflated. I was going to talk about the Florida guy who got dismissed. The honest truth is I couldn't remember his name, so I just skipped the story. But sometimes that happens. Nonetheless, RS Andrews Cool Down. Make sure you check them out online at rsandrews.com. They'll take care of all your needs. $99 Smiley tune-up. Get your air conditioning back to factory fresh specs with 90-plus degree temperatures today. That air conditioning system working the way it's supposed to is a pretty important thing, and RS Andrews will get you back there. Or water heater on the blink, something like that. Just check out my friends, Dari and the whole gang, at rsandrews.com. We're also going to do some pretty fun stuff with RS Andrews coming up during the upcoming season here, which I'm really excited about. We'll tell you about that in the days to come. But for now, go to rsandrews.com and find out more about them. And I will go to Facebook and YouTube and get some of your comments. The YouTube people always feel like I give them short shrift, so let me start over here at first today, and we'll kind of roll through a lot of comments. We do have to start being a little more time sensitive just because we've got a lot of stuff going on, and I want to make sure that I get it all in. So we're going to hop off the air here. We're not going to stay anywhere close to noon today. Enrique Murillo says, BA, what was your honest reaction to the Pickens catch? So I kind of jokingly called it the greatest catch in the history of football earlier. That's a slight exaggeration, but no exaggeration. I thought it was spectacular. I thought it was amazing, and I thought it was perfect timing for Georgia. And the fact that it, kind of got leaked out, and I have my theories about how that happened, but the fact that it leaked out, I think actually is a really good thing for UGA. Kirby wanted to downplay it during the press conference on Saturday, and that's kind of his job as a coach. But the video is a really cool thing for Georgia. And it's a really nice potential foreshadowing of what Pickens might be able to do more of this year. Now, as John said, he's going to be asked to do more than just go up and make circus catches. And his presence on the field is going to be determined by a lot more than that kind of stuff. But I'm not going to throw a whole bunch of water on this. I thought it was an awesome moment for a player that I'm already very excited about. And I'm telling Georgia fans that you ought to be really excited about it too. I thought it was just a ton of fun, Enrique, and I'm glad you asked about it. Crow King 123 says Aki and Ola Gunby reopened his recruitment. Is that true? I didn't heard that. I did hear this the other day, that Gunby celebrated his mom's birthday on August 8th, which is ironic. That's my mom's birthday as well. So it's funny that you bring up Gunby because I noticed him on Twitter the other day wishing his mom a happy birthday on the same date my mom celebrates her birthday. RT367 says, where do you see Cade Mays this season? Does he beat out Ben Cleveland or does he rotate? So right now, Georgia is certainly making it appear that Cleveland and Mays are in just a knockdown, drag-out, Pier 6 brawl to start at right guard. But they did the same thing during spring, and when G-Day took place, it was the offensive line as we would have expected it to be, with Cleveland at right guard there that day on the red team offense. That doesn't necessarily mean anything, but it is at least somewhat ceremonial, and I believe that the summer is, if I had to guess, is going to work out the same way. I think that they'll show Mays a lot getting first-team reps, and on August 31st against Vanderbilt, I believe that Cleveland will be the starter at right guard. I think that Cade Mays is an SEC starter. I absolutely believe he's an SEC starter, and I think that Georgia's lucky to have him, and I think the way that Georgia is going to show that it's lucky to have him is by using him in a variety of spots. You've even heard some whispers about center, for instance. Right now, Mays is a great sixth man. I'm going to date myself by some of these references. He's like a Vinny the Microwave Johnson style six man right now, the kind of guy that can come in as an extra offensive lineman, give you a lot of energy, but ultimately I believe that Cleveland's going to be too significant to beat out on that. Blind Squirrel Sports says, BA, does the subtraction of a highly rated sophomore outside linebacker, I'm assuming he means Brenton Cox, aid UGA's recruiting efforts for future athletes at this position? I mean, I don't think it hurts. I mean, Georgia's the kind of program, and there is a couple of maxims that I operate on when it comes to football. And one that you'll hear me say a lot is that who you bring into a program is always more important than who you have departing from a program. That means juniors leaving for the NFL. With all due respect, that means injuries. That means, guys acting like a knucklehead and getting kicked off the team. Whatever else you want to mention. There are a number of reasons why guys may leave a program. Ultimately, who you have coming in is more important. So actually, in a practical sense, you have to have guys leave the program. You can't be a team full of fifth-year seniors. If you are, you're not in the mix for, James Williams, who Jeff is writing about today at DawgNation.com, or, pick anybody you want to. Jordan Birch from the class of 2020. Go down to Florida and get another defensive lineman if you want to. You're not in the mix for those guys if you don't have guys leaving the program. So I really don't sweat departures all that much. Y'all never heard me say one bad word about all the juniors that chose to leave. If somebody gets hurt, for the most part, quarterback's a little different this year, but for the most part, that's also kind of a next man up situation. We talked a good bit about Holloman simply because Georgia had no experience left at the receiver position once J.J. was off the team. But in almost every instance, who you're bringing in is more important than who you're seeing leave. So, yeah, for Georgia, in almost every situation, the presence of an extra scholarship is a good thing. Dapper Dan says, sounds like Cox chose to make the decisions that got him to the point where he was no longer part of the team. He chose to break the rules, fight players, fight coaches. I don't know about that last one. He was undoubtedly warned first. So I said this on Friday when we did the live show, and for those of you that tuned in for that, I appreciate you doing so. I don't mean DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. I mean the live DN90 we did once we found out that Cox was in the Florida roster. I'm not going to trash Brenton. There were obviously a lot of things for him at Georgia that were not working out. Some of those things are known, can't be reported. Some of those things are speculated, probably true. Some of those things may be exaggerated, but whatever it is, you don't have to be Joe Insider to know that somehow, some way, Brenton Cox wasn't fitting into Kirby Smart's culture at Georgia. But even if that's true, and I believe it likely is, I'm not going to trash him. I'm not going to say bad things about him going out the door. I think that Georgia's going to be fine without him. I don't think that he's going to change the fortunes for Florida all that much, although there's a chance he ends up being a good player. And I think that Georgia will likely just keep right on rolling on the field and in recruiting. But it is seemingly obvious that somehow there wasn't a good cultural fit between Brenton and UGA. And, listen, along those same lines, you may have read Connor's Good Day UGA piece from a few days ago where Brenton was like doing the double peace sign thing in the photo during practice. I'm not saying that's a big deal. I'm not saying it's not, but posing for a photograph during a Georgia practice, I can tell you, is a very out of context thing, if that's the right way to use that phrase. A Georgia football practice is the most serious thing you have ever seen. It's 1,000,000 degrees usually, spring practice not so much, but 1,000,000 degrees. Guys are sweating and fighting and grunting, just going through like the most fundamental drill you've ever seen. That's intense. The way in which they strike a sled is intense. The way in which they are, running is intense. To have anybody aware of a camera and throwing up the peace signs, which you can see the photo for yourself at DawgNation.com, that's not a typical practice behavior. But I'm not going to say even that is the evidence that somehow Brenton wasn't a good guy or a good teammate or anything along those lines. I think that there is a lot that can be read into the fact that he's no longer here, and frankly, I think I'm going to let the event speak for itself and not try to add any extra color to it. Stacy Goebel talking about some of the rumors that are out there. Honestly, I'm going to leave those where they are, Stacy, but yes, I mean, I think we're all probably aware of some of that kind of stuff. RT367 says, do you believe that Matt Lander's G-Day game performance is a fair assessment of his ability to earn a starting spot? RT, here's what I believe I can say about Landers. He is solidly in the mix. You call him a starter. I think of starters more along the lines of the 5 or 6 receivers that play the most. Georgia rotates at least 2 guys on virtually every play, if not wholesale changes every other play. So when I think of starting receivers, I think of the 6 guys who play the most. And right now, Matt Landers is solidly in that group competing for that opportunity in a way that not every receiver is. I don't know that he's a favorite to do that necessarily, but he is definitely in contention to be one of those guys. And the thing that could keep him from being there, because he looks the part, and frankly, if we have a dazzling highlight competition, I'm not quite so sure that Landers' best moment might not at least rival somewhat of what we saw from Pickens in the leaked video on Saturday. On on Lander's best moment, he's probably pretty dazzling himself, but the more consistent performance from Landers is seemingly what has been lacking, and Kirby Smart's been good enough to share his candid thoughts on that. So is Landers very much in the competition right now? I would say yes. He is very much in the competition for what we think of as the first string offense, but he's going to have to be consistent on a practice level to maintain a spot there, and he's also dealing with some guys who are kind of coming around the bend. Let me I'll come back to YouTube. I've been on YouTube for a long time, though. Facebook folks are going to be hot now, and I apologize for that. Sometimes I kind of get lost in my own world and just keep going forever. So Facebook folks, I apologize for just now getting to you, but let me dive over here and get a lot of comments from many of you, and we'll keep this conversation going. Joseph Campbell says, I hope that Tyson Campbell isn't too banged up. Yeah, I know there was the issue with that going back to Saturday. I don't have any reason to believe that's a serious injury right now, but I would think that Campbell is also one of these guys that that I would expect to be, assuming everybody's healthy, Stokes and Campbell, I expect those two guys to be your starting cornerbacks, and for Georgia, I think that's a very good thing. I believe it was it Thursday we talked about this, that when you look at the speed the Alabama receiving corps possesses, to be able to match that speed with your own secondary is a big deal. Stokes is a fast runner. Tyson Campbell is a world-class sprinter, and so you want him to be healthy. You want him to be that guy. The fact that he's played some only makes him, I believe, even better, and so that's my hope. I will also add, y'all, there is a lot of buzz right now about these younger defensive backs, guys that just came to the program. I don't know that any of them, barring injury, were to become a starter this year. But between Tyreek Stevenson and DJ Daniel and Lewis Seen, two corners and a safety, that is a very, very impressive trio of guys right now. A very impressive trio of guys. So it's really good to think about. Bobby Leather says, so from what I read, Bennett looked good at the first scrimmage. Does this make you feel better about our backup quarterback position? If you've noticed, Bobby, over the last couple of weeks, I've kind of been warming to the idea of Stetson Bennett a little bit more. I've just heard some buzz about Bennett even beyond what you might have heard coming off this scrimmage on Saturday, about his accuracy and about his arm strength. And if you go back and watch what happened during G-Day, you see a guy that does a pretty fun thing really well. And this is going to sound negative. I mean this positive. He kind of dances around in the backfield and keeps plays alive. You know, if he were taller, he'd be starting for Ole Miss right now or starting for Arkansas right now. If he were a little bit taller, he's probably a starter at a major FBS level program, maybe even a team in the SEC. He's not, so he plays the game a little bit different. When you go back and watch the G-Day thing, and sometimes I'll pop that in the old DVR and rewatch some of that kind of stuff, you know, he gets compared to like Baker Mayfield because he pretended to be him during Rose Bowl practices because they have a little bit of a similar underdog recruit story. But he does kind of remind you of one of those Big 12-style quarterbacks who's a little small but really throws the ball, finds a way to keep plays alive, and kind of brings his own energy to the table with him. So I'm not telling you that you want him as your starting quarterback for 9 games. That might be a tough spot for Georgia, like every program is with its backup quarterback seemingly these days. But Stetson Bennett being fun to watch, yeah, maybe so. Richard Smith talking about Zamir White. That was the other kind of comment that Kirby Smart did not want to address all that much. Did not want to talk about what was it Mike said, that he may have had a catch or a run or something like that.
A 50-yard catch.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's not the kind of thing that Kirby Smart wanted to talk a whole lot about on Saturday. But, I mean, Connor's at Athens every day. I'm there a pretty good bit. I don't think there is any reason to think that there are any limitations right now on Zamir White whatsoever. Now, does that mean he's going to be just mauling people on fall Saturdays? We'll have to wait and see. But Zamir White is a formerly injured player. He is not an injured player anymore. He used to be injured. He had an injury in his past, and for Zamir, he's obviously had 2, which makes it a little more interesting to watch him come back. But in August of 2019, Zamir White is a healthy football player right now. So whatever whatever you think is a possibility for a redshirt freshman, knowing that he's got a Heisman Trophy candidate in front of him, and knowing that Brian Harrion is not going anywhere, Zamir's bigger issue for me right now are the other backs on the Georgia roster, and not necessarily any kind of limitations on him. I mean, Connor, you've talked to a million Georgia players about Zamir. You've heard from Kirby every time he's spoken thus far this summer. I don't believe Zamir White is just as much of a football player as any of the other 84 guys in this roster, I believe.
I am floored that, by all accounts, Zamir White, one of the more, if not the most impressive player from the scrimmage, based on what I have heard from people who were there, just in terms of, what we thought he'd be capable of. Kirby said he ran very tough, very physical, which I think is maybe the most encouraging thing you've seen from him this far. It took a full hour into your show to finally mention him over how he did. And if I had told you that 2 weeks ago, I said something huge better have happened. But, I think the George Pickens thing has sort of overglossed, what I think might be maybe a more important scrimmage for what Zamir White can do going forward than what Pickens did with one catch that may have been the number 4 play on top 10 plays.
Why do you have to be so snarky? It's a strong take. Obviously, Zamir will continue to be talked about a lot. We have talked about him a lot already. But with all due respect to Zamir or Pickens or anybody else, for me, the number one story from Saturday is Kirby Smart's disappointment in the starters. That, to me, is the number one story. And even if it is paint by numbers, this is what coaches say and do, that's still the bigger overall theme from this, because I have no reason to believe that Kirby Smart was exaggerating that whatsoever. Even if he knew on Wednesday he was planning on being disappointed in his starters on Saturday, even if he knew that on Wednesday, I have no reason to believe that there was a lack of evidence for him to feel that way.
Yeah, it's interesting. He did not mention Jake Fromm by name during this press conference. And I do think that it's interesting. I mean, granted, he wasn't asked about him, but, you do think if Jake had played well, or at least, played okay, Kirby would have said something about that during that press conference. But, he didn't. Weren't a whole lot of questions asked specifically about, starters such as guys like Andrew Thomas, DeAndre Swift, Jarrett Reed, Richard LeCounte. Was more some of those ancillary players that we don't theoretically know a whole lot about right now. But, I get what your concern is with them not being sharp, not being crisp. But, a lot of these starters have been through the wars. Andrew Thomas has seen everything he's going to see. Jake Fromm has seen everything he's going to see. Jarrett Reed's going to see everything he sees. Sure, you would love them to be at their maximum effort and level in a August scrimmage, but I don't think it's the end of the world that they had a bad scrimmage in a hot August day.
So I want to get back to this in a moment. We do have, I don't want to say it's breaking news. I'd be taking it too far. But Dante Edie was good enough to point this out in the comment section on Facebook. Rick Gilbert has shared with Darnell Washington on Twitter the George Pickens video. So the video has now served its purpose.
Yep.
Whatever it was put out into the internet for, and whoever it was that put it out there, it has now done its job as a part of UGA lore, because Rick Gilbert, that's right, is wait, maybe this is, I'm sorry, that's not Darnell Washington. That's that he tagged George Pickens. I apologize, but nonetheless, Rick Gilbert noticing the Pickens video on Twitter and tagging Pickens in that. Nice to see a 5-star playmaker noticing another 5-star playmaker doing big things at Georgia practice, and I appreciate Dante Edie for pointing that out to our attention, because honestly, whether I don't know if Georgia likes the fact this video is out there or not, but it is certainly serving their purposes to have it out there, with a Rick Gilbert making notice of it on his own Twitter feed.
Yeah, I think you're hoping Darnell Washington noticed it there as well. Just because those are the type of guys that Georgia, prior to last year, just has not gotten. They have not gotten those super athletic receiver types before. And if Pickens is coming in and doing this right away, and people are taking notice of it, and Georgia's willing to put Pickens in a spot where he's able to do sort of things like that, that should be seen as an encouraging sign for guys like Gilbert and Washington, who Georgia very much wants and needs in this 2020 recruiting class.
So I want to go back to this because there's some other fun stuff on YouTube about this as well. But let me go back to what Connor was saying before about Zamir White. Here's what I'm the belief of. The fact that Kirby said the starters were quote-unquote lethargic on Saturday, I don't think it's that big of a deal, but I do think it sets up a conversation that is a big deal. For as much as I have just filled up the bandwidth of the internet talking about Zamir White, and gosh knows I have, turned George Pickens into, something even larger than he already was. And on we go with Nolan Smith and everybody else. Those are the guys that contribute to a national championship. But they are not the guys who are going to win it. As I said before, this show exists to reflect the buzz. Hey, did you hear about what so-and-so may have done? There's a rumor out there that blah, blah, blah may have done blah, blah, blah. And for the most part, we're a fan-centered show that reflects that buzz. Next Saturday, I hope the buzz is about Jake Fromm. Next Saturday, I hope the buzz is about first-team offensive line led by veterans like Andrew Thomas. I hope the buzz is about DeAndre Swift or Richard LeCount or a veteran, Eric Stokes maybe even. As we get closer to the start of the season for Georgia, the buzz needs to be about veteran players because the young guys, even the exciting ones, they will contribute to a national championship, but it's the veterans, the so-called best players on this team who are going to be the ones that win that national championship.
Right. We didn't hear a whole lot about Lawrence Cager, Tyler Simmons, Demetrius Robertson in this scrimmage, and those are kind of the guys, as much as we love to talk about the freshmen and the new players and all that, those are the guys we need to hear a lot. We need to hear Kirby Smart rave about Tyson Campbell, Eric Stokes. We need to hear him, and not to say that he didn't say nice things about Monty Rice and Tate Crowder, but we need to hear that those guys had a really good scrimmage for Georgia because that's going to be, I think, a really encouraging sign for what this team can do in 2019 is your veterans improving and getting better. Because talent is going to cycle in always, but it's really what kind of leap those guys make going from sophomores to juniors or juniors to seniors that can really put a whole new ceiling on Georgia's season.
Jay Harwell says it might be premature, but does gaining Pickens and seeing what he brings to the table take some sting out of losing J.J. Holloman? Yeah, there's no doubt it does. For me, the Holloman issue is not about the absence of your number one overall receiver because even with a good year from Holloman, who, by the way, I guess it is now official, he's going to FIU to play with Butch Davis down there. But the issue with Holloman is not losing your number one receiver. It's losing a percentage of your returning receiving yards because I thought it would be possible that someone could have surpassed Holloman's receiving total this season, and I would have told you that Pickens was a pretty strong candidate to be able to do that. But even when you have one of these big freshmen that burst on the scene, the way that Calvin Ridley once did for Alabama a couple of years ago, the way that Judy kind of did in 2017, the way that Justin Ross for Clemson definitely did in 2018. Even with that, you still have to complement that with a pretty good dose of receiving yards to go along with the big new freshman phenom. And a lot of those yards almost always come from returning players. Georgia's not lacking for a potential star receiver, but Georgia is somewhat lacking for the complementary pieces that might go around that star. And if Holloman hurt you one way or another, it's really more in that regard than because listen, I think that JJ is a really good player, and I think that last year there were times in which I was very impressed with him. I'm not quite so sure how high his ceiling is. I know that he has a pretty impressive floor. He's established himself and would have been a big help to Georgia. For a guy like Pickens and probably Blaylock as well, maybe even Robertson, the ceiling is much higher, and therefore there was a chance one of those guys was going to surpass him as Georgia's leading receiver anyway.
So, because I wrote about the Pickens catch this morning, Demetrius Robertson, and sometimes not putting the cart before the horse in terms of hype trains and things like that. Do you think Georgia's wide receiver room at the end of this year will be better than it was at the end of the 2018 season?
I do. I absolutely do.
Even though 3 of those guys were NFL round draft picks.
I absolutely do.
That's a big ask.
My reason for saying that is that, and maybe all college teams do, I don't follow their stats quite as closely, Georgia has been replacing receiver production pretty effectively now for a number of years, even predating the Kirby Smart era. They have had, if you look at their top 3 receivers, it was almost always Terry Godwin and 2 other guys. Georgia has replaced receiver production now for a few years and done so fairly well. Plus, for as much of an NFL future as Ridley and Hardman and Godwin, had at UGA, throw in Isaac Nada, who had more than 400 yards receiving a year ago. That is not an insurmountable total. It's not an insurmountable total. And so I respect all those guys. I think they're all really good. And yet I do think it is fairly realistic to say that Georgia is going to be at least that good, if not better, when it comes to its receiving room this year. But the caveat to that is winning a national championship requires being a lot better. The area on the Georgia roster that has been the farthest from national championship standard has been wide receiver. Defensive line's kind of close, but wide receiver has been the area on the Georgia roster. This was even true in 2017, which was the high water mark for receivers, at least on an individual basis since Kirby's been the coach. The area on the Georgia roster that's been the farthest away from national championship caliber, national championship standard, has been the wide receivers. So being as good, maybe even a little bit better, I don't think is as big an ask as you do. Being as good as it needs to be, that definitely remains to be seen.
I get your point and all that, but Georgia hasn't lost the last 2 years, in my estimation, to Alabama because its wide receiver play wasn't good enough. Riley Ridley was real good in both of those games last year. Mecole Hardman made big plays in those games, and just because the production might not be there over the course of a 15-game season, there was still a lot of talent in that room and guys who could do a lot of things. And with this team, with this group, I just don't know if that's while they might have more production during the course of those 15 games, that might be just because Georgia throws the ball more. Because, again, as we've stated over and over again, Georgia was one of the more run-heavy teams in college football a year ago. That's probably going to change a little bit this year. From what we've heard on Coley, he wants to open up the playbook and throw the ball, not significantly more, but 4, 5, 6 times a game more. And so, yes, that will add up over the course of a season. But in terms of maybe a one-game sample, like where you need guys to beat the man across from you, I don't know if I feel as good about this year's wide receiver room doing that as I would have last year.
I want to get Bobby Leather's comment on the receivers. Let me respond to that quickly, though, by saying that college football is kind of an interesting thing in that the consistent level of the program does more to predict the outcome than sometimes changing over the names. For instance, even though players completely cycle through a program virtually every 4 years, many of them leave after 3 years, the 5-year average for production for college teams actually more predictive in college than it is in the NFL, where conceivably players could last a little bit longer. So the Georgia receiver situation, I believe, kind of is sort of what it is, whoever those names are, just because by now we're moving into year 4 of Kirby Smart. We've got a little bit of a track record established. I do have some questions about does it get as much better as I think that it needs to be, but we've got a fairly well-established track record for what Georgia receivers kind of look like, and so for the most part, that's kind of what I think. Bobby asked an interesting question, though. Bobby Leathers on Facebook. He says, I really think Cager is going to be our leading receiver at the end of this national championship winning season. First of all, you like the idea of the big prediction there at the end. I think the statement about Cager is also really interesting. We've talked a lot about George Pickens because of the big dazzling catch that he made, but I think it's very reasonable to assume that right now he is not ahead of an older player on the depth chart. Someone like Cager, who has familiarity with James Coley. James Coley has familiarity with him. Cager's played some major college football. We saw the big play from Pickens that got shared on the internet. But, Connor, I don't believe that should be assumed on the part of fans. That means that Pickens is going to be the first guy to get targeted versus Vanderbilt this season. As of right now, I don't think that Pickens, and I'm actually pretty confident saying this, Pickens is not one of Georgia's 3 top receivers of this moment right now. The older players are more likely to be that.
When I go out to practice later today, the 3 wide receivers we're going to see are Tyler Simmons, Demetrius Robertson, and Lawrence Cager going through drills. Now, they might put Matt Landers.
Say those names one more time, please.
Tyler Simmons, Demetrius Robertson in the slot, and Lawrence Cager on the outside.
Yeah, that seems about right.
They might put Matt Landers ahead of Cager because they've done that, every once in a while just to sort of maybe give a different look. But in my heart of hearts right now, I believe the first 3 wide receivers on the field when Georgia takes on Vanderbilt on August 31st will be Cager, Robertson, and Simmons.
Jay Bolton says, what about Trey Blunt? You and I were talking about this the other day. I don't always have the greatest memory, But I thought the other day that Blunt had worked his way up into some drills a little bit, maybe a little higher in the pecking order than he had been before. The honest truth is, maybe I just assumed that. I don't know if that was true or not. But the one thing about Trey is, I'm going to keep telling y'all this. You should not count him out of the conversation because he's just tough. He is sort of a classic Kirby receiver in that he's very physical. In the moments when he's been targeted, whether it be G-Day or an actual game, he's caught the football. It's not like he's had bad cases of the drops, hasn't been targeted a ton, but he's recorded catches in his Georgia career before. He's at least gotten one catch that I can remember. Obviously been on the field a lot in 2017, including some of the real key plays. So he's obviously got a lot of bodies that he's dealing with. There are a lot of people in the competition with him. But would I say right now that Trey Blunt's excluded from this discussion, that he's somehow not going to have a chance to be on the field? There are some guys buried on depth charts that you might, with a reasonable degree of certainty, be able to say that about. But I'm not completely taking my chips off Trey Blunt's name on the roulette wheel just simply because he's just so dadgum tough. And, you know, he came from the same program that Jamari Salyer did and Andrew Thomas. He's been well coached. We know that Terrence Edwards has been involved in that Pace Academy program. That means that Trey's gotten some good individual coaching along the way. That alone is enough for me to at least leave a little bit of a marker over there on Trey's name just to collect. Probably a little bit of a long shot. May not be one of the top 6 guys for Georgia this year, certainly not among the top 3. But I am never going to completely take my chips off Trey Blunt's name as long as he's in there and fighting, because a lot of the stuff that he already does well is the kind of stuff that Kirby Smart and Cortez Hankton really like.
I think Trey Blunt is going to be that 6th guy in the 6-man rotation. Kirby likes guys who can block, and I think Blunt, better than Kearis Jackson, certainly on the outside anyway, better than Kearis Jackson, better than Matt Landers in terms of, you know, blocking, springing big runs, turning 15-yard runs into 50-yard runs. I think that's where Blunt is going to be able to come on the field, make an impact. You're going to see him probably switch a lot with Tyler Simmons at sort of that other outside wide receiver position. And then you'll have Pickens and Gator at the other one, and then Blaylock and Robertson, I think, by the end of the season. Those would be your 2 slot guys.
All right, let me get this from Douglas Buchanan, then we're going to get off the air. Douglas says that Zachary Evans knows where he's going per his Instagram Live. Expect a commitment soon. Let me get the rest of this comment from who knows where his mind is at, though, if he commits soon. I don't think it's over, though. I agree with you on that last part, that even if he does commit, my guess is this is a recruitment that goes all the way to the end. I'm assuming the end means December here when it comes to Zachary Evans. But, Connor, did you hear this, that Instagram Live disappears, too? That's not the kind of thing you can go back and find. Did you hear that Evans said on Instagram Live that he knows where he's going to go?
I did. I think I believe that as well. But, you know, that stuff can certainly change. All indications are right now Georgia's in a very good spot with Evans. It was the last school that he visited, but he's been to Texas A&M a lot. And at the end of the day, A&M is going to make it very, very difficult for Evans to leave the state. But if you're a Georgia fan, you should feel as good as you possibly can right now about Evans playing for Georgia.
I apologize for that. Yeah, here's my complicated response to all this. If Evans were to commit right now or very soon within the next couple of days, I think that Georgia would be the favorite to land that commitment. But I don't know how good that would make me feel about Georgia being, or how significant of a favorite it would make me feel that Georgia is to hold on to that commitment to the point that the LOI is signed. But if he were to announce a commitment coming up pretty soon, I'm assuming that would be good news for Georgia just based on the buzz that's been out there as of late, some of which may be circumstantial evidence and inadmissible in the court of law. But nonetheless, if we found out today that on Thursday Zachary Evans was going to have some sort of ceremony, I guess I'd say with a relatively strong degree of certainty that Georgia would probably be the pick if it were to happen soon. But I'm going to still come on here and tell you that I believe the Evans recruitment is different than Kendall Milton's, which I assumed was over even before he announced Georgia. Keely Ringo, who I assume is going to go to Georgia and be floored if he doesn't. Other players you might point to as more likely to be at Georgia, even if they're uncommitted, or current UGA commits that you think have no chance of looking around or talking to anybody else or being anywhere else, whatsoever. The Evans recruitment's just a different kind of thing than that. There are going to be a few of these every year that are just more contested, and even if Georgia holds the public pledge, I believe that's still a contested recruitment.
Yeah, it's a recruitment that's going to go the distance. You said you won't buy it until you see pen on paper and that national letter of intent is in. I won't believe it until it's January 8th or 9th, whenever Georgia starts classes next year and Evans is on campus. And even then, I mean, we saw this year with Brew McCoy from going from USC to Texas to back to USC. Maybe in this new world of recruiting, Georgia has to keep recruiting Zachary Evans throughout the season and keep him, in Georgia instead of just going, to Texas A&M.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair thing to think about for sure. All right, so it's going to be a busy day here around DawgNation again. We'll be in Athens coming up later on today for Georgia practice, update of everything that's going on with that, maybe more fallout from the scrimmage. Who knows? We'll see what goes down with all of that. Of course, I'll be back tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily. We'll do that live here on the video channels and our RS Andrews Cool Down as well. Let me also say, by the way, Atlanta, Fulton districts go back to school here today, so they're busy on that. You can find out more news on this at ajc.com. Get your Atlanta news now at ajc.com. And you may have seen this as well. I guess now everything is just video. There's a really interesting look at the AJC about how a lot of neighborhoods now have license plate cameras. So with the doorbell cameras and the license plate cameras and everything else, just know this. You are constantly being watched everywhere you go, including George Pickens, I guess, at Georgia practice, come to find out there as well. You can find out more about that at ajc.com as well. Get your Atlanta news now at ajc.com. Huge thanks to R.S. Andrews for bringing the R.S. Andrews Cool Down to you. Air, heating, plumbing, electric. They play all the positions for us here at DawgNation, and they can do the same for you. So check them out online at rsandrews.com. Y'all have a great day. I'll see you back here again tomorrow for DawgNation Daily and our R.S. Andrews Cool Down after that. We'll talk to you then.